Now, I would like to introduce a American war historian, Tom Tart, who today is dressed as a Florida stalwart named Plant. You all know of Plant City. You probably don't know all that Plant has done for Florida. So let me go on with the introduction. Mr. Tart is a fifth-generation Floridian born in Jacksonville. He attended the University of Florida on a football scholarship where he received a BSBA and later attended Stetson University College of Law and received his Juris Doctor. He moved to Orlando on graduation and worked for none other than Leon Handley. After 41 years of law practice, he retired in the summer of 2009. He worked for a civil practice law firm for 14 years and then 25 years with the Orlando Utilities Commission as House Counsel, Vice President, and General Counsel. Tommy says that was the best of times. He still lives in Orlando and has been doing programs on Florida and World War II veterans. He has helped create World War II markers, historic markers, at Fort Gatlin, at Pine Castle, and other places. And Tommy is in the University of Florida Student Hall of Fame and a member of Florida Blue Keys. So I introduce Tom Tart as Colonel Plant.
Dick, you got the mic on? Y'all hear me? Dick's gonna turn me in. All right, can you hear me? Well, I'm glad to be here today. Leon Handley used to say, if you're gonna be impotent, you gotta look impotent. So I look impotent today. People asked one of the best dressed guys in town to be here. He said he couldn't make it. Then he asked a senior lawyer to come. He said he couldn't make it. But when people call me, I said, I will not turn you down 3 times in a row. So people, I'm here.
Yeah, it is.
And on Florida, I was a backup to some great players. My roommate made All-American. I used to hold field goals for Spurrier, and I was a backup player. In fact, Emerson, my nickname on the Florida football team was Judge Tart. It wasn't because I planned to go to Stetson or practice law here in Orlando. Emerson, it was because I had so much experience sitting on the bench. Judge Tart. So today, I'm going to tell you about early travel, transportation, this very railroad, 140 years ago, and how we evolved from dirt trails to steamboats to railroads to what we are today. This railroad was dedicated.
Rich, you gotta enable me to share my screen.
1880. It wanted to it was going to connect the port of Sanford and Kissimmee, the port. And they needed to have a big showing, big dedication. So they invited Ulysses Grant, former president of the United States, who was short on money, to come down and cut the tape to dedicate the railroad. So when he got to Jacksonville, he says, anything you want to see, General Grant, in Florida? He said, yeah, I want to see Silver Springs. So he took him to Palatka, put him on a little steamboat, went to Ocala. When he got there, it was late in the day. If you've ever been on the Ocklawaha or the Silver Springs,
okay, now I got it.
You can't do it in a hurry. So the steamboat captain says, we can't leave till tomorrow. So they rushed into Ocala, the Secret Service, and got a room under a fictitious name. Because Grant was hated in Florida, somebody would have shot him real quick. So Grant spent the night in Ocala, got on the steamboat, came back to Palatka. Well, when he got to Sanford to dedicate the railroad, guess what? There was no hotel room. So Mr. DeBerry, across the lakes, Lake Monroe, said, you can stay at my home. So Grant stayed at the Berry Mansion, came across and dedicated the railroad. And that was in 1880. I was there for the 100th anniversary when we dedicated the marker, and I went wearing this outfit. It was a lot looser then, but I'm here. So today, I'm going to talk to you about the railroad later, but I'm going to talk about steamboats that made us what we are, Then the railroads that attached us to the rest of the world by Henry Plant and Henry Flagler. And then I'm going to talk about the early parts with the road stagecoaches and whatever. My first picture here is over in Titusville. Land Utilities had a plant there, and our plant manager lived in a Jack Eckert subdivision called Wendover. He planted most of the houses and was still building a little road in a bog. I wouldn't call it a lake, but a little bog. The backhoe operator went in to scoop some dirt and discovered a cadaver. He said, oh my gosh. So he called the Brevard County coroner. He came out and said, this cadaver is something I've never seen. It's way, way older than I can imagine. So they called in the University of Florida archaeology folks and said, would you like to uncover this burial site? And they said, no, we've got hundreds of burial sites in Florida. We're not interested in the Wendover subdivision. Then they called Florida State. Ron Tyler back there, he's a Florida State graduate. They called it FSU and they said, we'd be glad to do it. What they found was one of the oldest archaeological sites in America, 7,000 years old. This muck had preserved the bodies with the brains still intact. So they carbon dated these Indians, 94 of them, and found out they lived 7,000 years. Well, if you know your history, the pyramids were just 3,000 years ago. So this was 4,000 years before the pyramids. They discovered three things here. First of all, that all the bodies were in alignment with the sun. They believed in a God. Secondly, on a woman cadaver, they found a vest, and they said, no way in heck could a Florida Indian have invented the loom to form a vest from the straw of a palm tree, palm fronds to make a vest. The loom came later. No. This vest proved archaeologists wrong. Vests were invented in Florida and across this country a lot earlier than they thought. And then the last thing they found a young 8-year-old boy in the muck underneath. And they did x-rays and studies, and they found out he was born with spina bifida, but died 8 years later from natural causes. So they there understood that some squaw and some Indian took care of that crippled boy, not as a savage, but as a mother and father, the Wendover subdivision. After Wendover, we go to some of the earliest paintings of Florida, and here, I have a picture of the St. Johns River with the earliest painting we know of this part of the world of an Indian canoe harvesting corn and harvesting pumpkins and harvesting nuts. And that Indian canoe is rowed by the Tomoquin Indians. And when you look how big and strong they were, you can see the muscles. Surely, Ron, these are FSU future Seminoles, because Gators don't have a looking this strong. Now, Ron would tell you these are Seminoles, not Gator Indians for future. I said, why do you know that, Ron? He said, the girls have already taken off their tops. So I'll go with that, Ron. You got me on that one, Ronnie. This was done in 1285. St. Augustine was done in 1565. So this was done by a French painter 20 years after the first continuous city. And this is a storage. They're going to store the corn and the pumpkin for winter. That's how sophisticated the Tomoquin Indians. The golf course in Seminole County, Timaquan, you can pronounce it, that's the same Indian tribe. Now, the Spanish came here in 1513. Ponce de Leon off of Melbourne discovered what he thought was an island and called us Pascua Florida, which means island of the flowers. Because back home in Spain, they were celebrating Easter, and he called us in the name of the flowers, Florida. But what he found later was it wasn't an island, it was a peninsula. The French came here in 1862, 3 years before St. Augustine, and set up a village. They thought on the St. Johns River where they've recreated Fort Caroline. Now, an archaeologist friend of mine said they think it's the next river up, the St. Mary's River between Florida and Georgia. These are French galleons. This is the early boat they used, a small sailboat, and this is the rowboat. These Indians were very friendly. They had nets to catch fish. They had bow and arrows to shoot the deer and the fowl, the ducks, the geese to eat. So they were very sophisticated Tomocan Indians in North Florida. St. Augustine came later. Now the first road was King's Highway during the Revolution. Before the Revolution, Florida was a British territory. So a fellow over at Titusville had a plantation to grow sugarcane. He knew the king, so he had the king pay for a road from Canaveral, right near the landing strip. I had 39A and B, and I've seen it. He built a road up to Georgia so they could take sugar and rum to Savannah to Charleston. He wanted the road called a chase and four, meaning the four horses and a sophisticated carriage. That's how good a road was built. I grew up in Jacksonville. I thought King's Highway was a Spanish road going to St. Augustine. No, it was a British road. Then Osceola massacres Major Dave near the intersection of I-75 and the Turnpike. They then built military trails. The first road that we know as a territory was military trail from Fort Brooke, downtown Tampa on the Hillsborough River, to East Ocala, Fort King. And it was on that road, that military trail, that Dade was massacred with his 102 men. 2 men survived by jumping in a pond while the Indians killed the rest of the men. They got back to Fort Brooke in Tampa, and they told the story of the Dade massacre. Because of that, this part of Florida then became military significance. Fort Maitland, we'll go to the next picture. Fort Maitland was built. 1821, we become a territory. The Dade massacre, 1835, December 28th. But everybody who came to Florida was living above the line with Gainesville and St. Augustine. There wasn't anything here until the Second Seminole Indian War. Now this is Ollie Phipps going to a party. Look at the hat. He hasn't shaven. He looks like a hobo. But this is Ollie doing investigative work. And look, he's got his goods in the back. And he doesn't have a horse or a mule. No, he's got a Florida oxen. I said, Ollie, why'd you use an oxen? He said, because we had sand, we had mud, and these big-footed animals could go anywhere. So the early Floridians came with oxen to pull their carts. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures. 1839, 3 years after the Dade massacre, and here it is, Fort Maitland, Fort Mellon, which became Sanford. The military built this fort here because you could get to it by boat, and then a 1 day's march to Maitland. You wouldn't be in the outdoors at night. You would spend the night in the fort. 1 day march below Maitland was where I lived, down by Fort Gatlin. I thought it was named after the Gatlin machine gun. Fort Gatlin was named after Dr. Gatlin, who was one of the last officers killed with Major Dade there at the ambush. And so they honored this position from Savannah by naming our first settlement Fort Gatlin after him. Fort Christmas was built later. It was not a direct connection. You had to go around by Jessup. Fort Christmas, which they've recreated, I invite you to go see it, was there. This, at that time, was South Florida. Now, the railroad was built by Flagler in 1885. So 3 years after the railroad, from St. Augustine to Palatka to Ormond Beach, to Daytona, down to Melbourne, Florida, was opened up. This is probably the first, before Disney got the idea. This is the cruise boat for tourists in 1880 on the Tomoka River. Now look, these two ladies' faces, they're scared to death of this little 7-foot Florida alligator. He couldn't bite a gnat, but look at their expressions. And this gal here is having an apple. She's enjoying the show. Just to protect the women, though, he's got his gun ready in case that gator gets out of hand. He talking about the African queen. Look, steamboat with lights to run at night. That is old Florida, and this is one of the first tourist attractions. Now, early Florida didn't have roads or highways. They used mules to pull wagons to the riverboats, the steamboats, And this is a picture of one of those crossing a creek carrying wood to be transported north. This is the first road in Orange County, if you don't count Military Trail, connecting Maitland, Fort Maitland with Sanford and Fort Gallen. It was called the road. It went from Sanford to Orlando, and all it was a wagon trail, one lane, and it went right by. If you go in Maitland, you know where Fort Maitland is on the right. It went right through there, coming from Orlando. Joseph Bumby was the Pony Express rider. He rode horses from right here, downtown Orlando, to Sanford, carrying the mail back and forth. Bumby Hardware Store was his hardware store, and later they named Bumby Avenue after the Pony Express driver. Early travel wasn't on a 747 or a Boeing 727. It was by steamboat. And here is the St. Lucie traveling up and down what became the Intercoastal, from Daytona down to Vero Beach to Fort Pierce to Melbourne to Titusville, making a stop. The gentlemen and ladies are up top in their morning coats, like I'm wearing here in the top hat, and down below was the cargo. So if you were hauling Florida oranges brought by the Spanish, you would load it up and send it back to Jackson to get on a boat to go to the northern markets. If you were hauling tomatoes or citrus products and or winter vegetable, you would store it back and forth, and the riverboat would take you north. This is what President Grant would have ridden on to get to Palatka, to get on a smaller boat to go to Silver Springs. And they connected through the inland waters. They had them on the Swanee River, the Escambia River, all the big rivers, including the river coming out of Fort Myers. Yeah, that's right, good Indian name. Coming out of Fort Myers were the big boats. But then they went over to the little boats. And here's the little boat that Grant would have traveled on from Palatka up to Silver Springs. They were the side wheel, small steamboats. Now, I'm amazed at this picture because the cargo went before and the passengers up here, but they're the deer antlers. But look, he's got a gun, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. Only thing I can figure is deer would cross the river, the Ocklawaha River and the Silver River, and they would shoot the deer, and then the cook on board would have deer meat that night instead of canned goods. But I think this is a great picture. Now, you all know Lake Harney. One of the first settlers in this part of the world was Will Wallace Harney. After the Civil War, he came by wagon to the Ocklawaha near Ocala, went down the river on this type boat, got to Sanford, got off the boat, and then by wagon, he went to Lake Conway to settle there. Lake Harney's named for him. This is the early 747 of our era. Now, at the time of the Civil War, this railroad was not built. There was no connection between Florida and the rest of the country. You know that Grant and Sherman went early to here on the river at Vicksburg to cut off cattle from Texas, the King Ranch, going to the railroad to feed Lee and Johnson's army. But when they Grant and Sherman cut the river, Florida would be the cattle producer of the South, because you couldn't refrigerate beef. You had to do it on the hoof. So they had to run cattle up to this railroad that went through my high school town, Valdosta, to Savannah and the rest. Paul Linder here knows more about cattle than I do. He has 400 head of cattle. They did have an early railroad from Fernandina to Cedar Key. This was important because if you were coming out of New Orleans, Mobile, Pensacola, instead of going all the way around Florida sailing, you could bring your goods to Cedar Key, take them by railroad in a day and a half to Fernandina, and save several weeks of sailing by using this cross-state railroad. But after the war, Henry Plant bought the railroad from Charleston, Savannah, and here at Waycross, Georgia, in 1886, he connected Florida railroads with the North, and that's what opened us up to tourism. It wasn't Walt Disney who first went to St. Louis and then went to Ocala and then picked out here where he is. No, it was Henry Flagler and Henry Plant that connected us. Plant, on his second marriage, came to Jacksonville and went down to St. Augustine to stay there. And his wife said, you know what? we had to wait on a barge to take us across the river. Why don't you build the railroad? So he had the railroad from Jacksonville to St. Augustine. And then he built that great hotel, which is there now, the Flagler Hotel, which was his premier hotel. He built a great town with St. Augustine. And then later he went from St. Augustine all the way to West Palm Beach and stopped there for a while. But this explains the railroads in 1861. Look at Atlanta, no wonder Sherman wanted it. Look at Chattanooga, no wonder Grant wanted it. And look at the early battle at Shiloh, one of the early Civil War battles. Look at the railroads there. But what Plant did, he bought this old railroad, connected Florida, and we would open up to the world. And his cohort, Flagler, did his part too. Now this is Jacksonville, my hometown, 1864. Lincoln said, we can't let Florida be connected by rail to bring all that cattle by rail to Georgia. We've got to cut the railroad line that they're building between the two states. So he sent his Navy, and look at these dozens of ships invaded Jacksonville with his army to cut the railroad. Their scouts said that nothing but old men guarding Lake City. So they marched out to cut the railroad being built to Georgia, and doggone it, Florida officer knew where the army was going. He telegraphed Savannah and said, I gotta have help. So they sent General Cobb, a veteran of Lee's army, from Savannah by train to Valdosta. They marched to Live Oak, got on a train, and got to Lake City, unbeknown to the Union Army. And there, a little place called Olustee, a major Civil War battle, the only one in Florida was fought, 12,000 troops engaged, and the Florida boys, with the help of the Georgians, took out the Union Army, and Tallahassee was the only capital east of the Mississippi that wasn't taken during the Civil War. This man you've probably never heard of, Diston. He was a saw manufacturer in Philadelphia. Florida, after Reconstruction, 12 years under Union control, was bankrupt. Diston comes along and says, I will give you $1 million, 25 cents an acre, to buy 4 million acres of Florida, on the condition that he would put in canals and drain it. Lake Conway was one of the connecting lakes that he used to drain the land to make it usable. He did up and down the Kissimmee River as far as Okeechobee and down the East Coast, which opened it up to Henry Flagler, just opened it up. Diston saved us financially. David. Now, this is one of my favorite maps. It's the railroad I was telling you about from Sanford, Mellonville, Sanford, to the port of Kissimmee. And there is a little town, if you see here, Orlando. You got Osceola, which became Winter Park. You got Longwood. You got Altamont Springs. This railroad in 1883 brought us in connection with the rest of the world, because Henry Plant then builds a railroad from Jacksonville to Palatka on to Sanford, and then in a Pullman car, you could leave Orlando and go to New York, Philadelphia. You didn't have to get off the train. Amy Eisenhower, when the president died at Gettysburg, and I've been to her farm there, she would catch a train with the Secret Service from Gettysburg to Washington and take a Pullman car right here to Winter Park and spend her winters there at the hotel, the one they tore down, they built the new Rollins College. What's the new Rollins Hotel? Alphont. Well, where the Alphont was, Amy Eisenhower came by Pullman car to Osceola, which is now Winter Park, and spent her winters. It opened up Florida. This was called the South Florida Railroad because there wasn't anything south of here. David? Now these are my two heroes, Henry Plant and Henry Flagler. They were rivals with Standard Oil, but the government broke up the monopoly of Standard Oil and they had to go into other businesses. Plant did something nobody had ever thought of. He said, these workmen in Florida building these railroads, I gotta protect. They didn't have workman's comp, so what did he do? Henry Plant built 6 hospitals for railroad employees and their families. One was in Sanford, one was in Clearwater, one was my football rival, Waycross. 6 hospitals to take care of employees. He built the railroad from Kissimmee to Tampa, and he became the father of Tampa. Plant Hospital is his son, Morton Plant. And then he didn't stop. He went around Tampa Bay, connected Clearwater, and St. Pete, where I went to law school, and then he went south to Sarasota and Fort Myers. Flagler went south to Palm Beach and stopped. He built the great home there, and he built a little beach club called the Breakers. Well, guess what? Mr. Tuttle sends flowers up and said, we don't have freezers in Miami. He said, she got me. We got frozen out up here. So he built the railroad to Miami, then to Key West, and the rest is history. Henry Flagler rode the train from Miami to Key West, open across the 7-mile highway. Now, this is one of my favorite pictures because it shows so much. You got the passenger car, you got the Florida, there he comes right now, he's on his way. He's right on time. You got the wood cut from cycling up, and then you got the oiler fixing it up. And this guy, they didn't have an OUC with electric lights. He's fixing this kerosene light to run at night. Now what this is the cattle catcher. As you're going down the track and some FSU graduates, cows on the track, he didn't know to get out of the way. So this cattle pusher doesn't run over it, he kicks his little butt out of the way. 1886, Florida was connected to Palm Beach. One of my favorite maps, 1891. Now look, from 2 little railroads in 1861, in 30 years, Florida is covered by railroads. Sanford was a key spot. You could go to Tavares. You could go all the way over to Brooksville. You could come from Gainesville to Ocala to Palatka. And then here, down here, is Kissimmee. And then Little Orlando there in between. This is Plant and Flagler at its best. And they developed Florida. You would take out citrus, you would take out vegetables, you would take out cattle, and you would take out watermelons. You would bring down tourists. So it wasn't Walt and Roy Disney, it was the railroad built by those 2 men that did the trick. Now this is the Atlantic Coastline Station, 1907. Plant died in 1899. They sold it, his family did, to the Atlantic Coastline, and this is the station right here on this same railroad a few miles south. Now they didn't have Model Ts. Model Ts came out in 1908. This is ox cart waiting on the train to come to pick up either people or cargo. And this little device here was a mail sack holder. So if the train didn't have any passengers to pick up, he would hook it as he goes by the mail, put it in the mail room, and it'd be sorted on the mail car. Early 1883, Orange County. Now this is what they call a tram road. And I used to go hunting with my dad, turkey hunting. He said, this is a tram road. I said, Dad, what is a tram road? He said, the railroad would bring a temporary railroad in, cut all the timber, put it on a train, it would take it to the sawmill, and then the lumber would be shipped north. Cedar Key was named because of the cedar trees they cut. That didn't grow back. Cypress, they took all the cypress down. The Winter Park Chain of Lakes was built to haul logs for the different Winter Park chains to the Dickey Dock where they had a sawmill. Windermere, the Chain of Lakes there, same deal, to haul logs through the lakes to the sawmill in Windermere and take it north. Big industries, lumber, citrus, and cattle. Tourists southbound. Now this is, if you'd have told me when I did the research that Narcoossee would have a train depot, I'd say you're crazy as heck. I didn't get a Phi Beta Kappa at FSU. I'm a Gator. I know better than that. But guess what? I was wrong. Here is a passenger train right down below Lake Nona at Narcoossee, picking up passengers, lumber, and turpentine and heading north. Great picture. Look at the ladies dressed up, and this little ramp was to roll the turpentine barrels to put in the cargo cars. Now, citrus was a big thing here. So they would load citrus in these hampers. They would put it in the railroad car with an ice house right up here a few blocks, ice from here or ice from Sanford, ice the car down to keep the citrus cool, shipped to northern markets. The dudes came to Oviedo. They bought celery in this part of the world. Same thing. They would ice down the vegetables and ship it north. We were the winter breadbasket of America. Here are hampers of okra and tomatoes and cabbage, and yes, the dude is celery, going in these hampers, ice cool cars at the Sanford Depot. This is a yard that either Plant or Flagler built to repair the locomotives because they had so many trains running across Florida. I told Tahoe, this kind of reminded me of an FSU fraternity. They didn't change the clothes but once a week and they all need to shave. Now, fast forward, same depot, Atlantic Coastline, they got the Model T. One of the models, the Model T, instead of the ox cart, same depot, 1924. This is my last picture. This is the train station behind the hospital on Slide. Atlantic Coastline, bought from Henry Plant family. They went out and did a nationwide bid for architects. They wanted a Spanish train station that everybody could recognize. And they built it in 1927. Now, do you realize this might be the only public building I know of in Orange County? It's almost 100 years old and being used today by Amtrak and Sunrail that just went by here. What a great use of money by the Atlantic Coastline. And look at the chapel, bell, and the architecture. We've been blessed because we've had leaders like Flagler and like Plant. But today, think about it. Bright House is going to go to West Palm Beach in 2 hours out of our airport. I drove to Cape the other day. It's 90% complete. You can get on a train and go to Miami faster than you go to the airport to fly to Miami and go through luggage. You can get there. 185 miles an hour. It's going to run. You go out to the Orlando airport, terminal number 3 is international. You can bring planes from South America, from Europe, all over here. They go through customs there, and they either get in, rent a car, get in an Uber, or they're going to one day have a train to Disney, I hope. And then last but not least, this new lane, I drove on it the other day. Somebody put together a toll road to get you out of rush hour traffic. It only cost a little money. I drove it. It says 60 miles an hour. I couldn't keep my foot off 65. But you can jump on here and go all the way to Longwood and not hit a slowdown. 3 great transportation projects. And it all goes back to that Indian canoe. We've come a long ways. Well, listen, as a substitute speaker, I'm glad to be here. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless all of you, especially you proposers. Thank you for what y'all are doing.
We have a few minutes for questions. Anybody have a question?
Yes, sir.
Tart, do you know the importance of the East Coast Railroad to Florida and the Silver Medium and the Silver Star?
Well, I know the Silver Medium and Silver Star were the 2 VIP trains that left out of Miami. When the Amtrak took over, they have one now that comes out of Tampa, stops here, and one comes out of Miami. So we might be the only city in this part of the world that's got 2 streamliners going to New York and on to Boston. Flagler sold his railroad, and they combined it with the coastline to form Amtrak, which now gives us rail service north and south. Yes, sir.
I believe in 1924, my grandparents and my dad and his brother and sister got off the train either at that station or the old station down on Church Street.
Church Street, yes.
And of course, if they got off on the Church Street station, they walked about 50, 60 feet and went over to the Orlando Hotel, which they ended up either owning, but they did run it, that's for sure, but that was almost 100 years ago. It may have gone through that station at that time.
And you know, the Alabama Hotel was built in Winter Park. You'd come by train and you could go over and stay the winter at the Alabama Hotel. Longwood, I remember going up there one day and saw a giant wooden hotel. And if you ever went to Ormond Beach, just as you went over the bridge, there was a giant hotel. And that, here again, was built for the railroad passengers who wanted to spend the winter here, and then for us Floridians to go to the beach. Yeah, Rockefeller had a home right down the way. Yeah, Flagler, yeah, one of his hotels, like Palm Beach, like Ormond Beach, and like the Great Hotel in Winter Park. I tell you what Plant did, though, he was smart. When he built the hotel in Tampa, he put a entrance for the families. So the wife coming from New York didn't have to worry about her hair or makeup. He went in the front door, the wife and the children went in the side door. What a smart Plant he was. Yes,
Tom,
sir.
that was a very engaging post. Thank you. So we talked about the past and how they just finished the expressway. What about the future of transportation? I know there's talk about the hyperrail, stuff like that. Do you have any idea like what they're working on in the next 10 years or so?
Well, I know this, and I didn't believe it, so I had a lunch with the financial director of this new expressway. He said this is the largest public work project in this part of Florida. That 26 miles, you go take the interstate and take it from 6 lanes and put 4 more lanes inside. That was a lot of money. They are planning, they've got plans to expand the I-4 from Tampa to Orlando. And they've got plans to 6-lane the turnpike. We're lucky that people like Hayden Burns, the governor, my mother's classmate, Andrew Jackson, as chairman, as governor, saw the foresight to put in the turnpike. And that's what Walt and Roy saw out of the plane that day, was the crossing of the turnpike and I-4 after St. Louis threw him a curveball, and after Ocala, the forced people from Kentucky under the land, he came here as number 3 choice, and it's because of those roads. But there are plans to expand them all.
Thank you, Tom, for what has to be the most interesting, informative, and humorous presentation we've ever had at our meeting. Quick question for you: how long and how much time did you dedicate to doing this incredible presentation?
Well, I was blessed. OUC sent me to Tallahassee a lot during the session, and where Emerson's wife is today at the legislature, they break up about 4 o'clock. Everybody goes to Clyde's for a beer. I went to the archives, and because OUC was quasi-governmental, the lady took me under her arm that owned the ran the Florida archives, and she would let me copy 3/4 of these pictures for a quarter a picture. So I got into pictures with white cotton gloves on that you couldn't normally go see. And then, because we were a semi-state agency, OUC, I got to copy them for a quarter a picture. I couldn't reproduce these pictures today.
Tommy, thank you very much. What a great presentation.
Tommy, we have a gift for you for that great presentation. Let's give him another hand.